Hello and welcome to The Rabbit Hole, the Definitive Developers Podcast, living large in New York. I'm your host, Michael Nunez, and today we'll be talking about simplicity, because simplicity is key to getting the work out fast. I mentioned last week that we'll be going over the 4 values of XP, and I wanted to just have a conversation, I guess, with those who are listening and I myself, to remind myself about these XP values. And this one is often the one that I, as a developer, often forget. The idea that simplicity is key. There's that acronym. What is it? I say KISS, but it's the KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid. Well, I think it's kind of rude to call someone stupid when they're learning how to keep things simple. But the KISS is just to keep it simple, and everything that you do, the work that you're putting out. A lot of the times we find that developers want to just build the latest and greatest thing or use the latest and greatest technology, which often, contradicts the idea of doing something simple. It's just a friendly reminder that if you can get something done and much faster, even though it's simple and it can be extended later, the better it is for your team overall. There's a story in the XP Explained book by Ken Beck. I think it has to do with, the product manager wanted a dialogue box of some sort. The developer wanted to, had a ton of questions on, who else is going to use it, extensibility, whether other teams can utilize this particular dialogue box, if you will. And the original way of building the dialogue box, according to the anecdote, takes about 20 minutes. You have I guess if I had to imagine a title, the message, okay button, this, that, to the third. But the developer wanted to make it more extensible, which in turn took 2 days to do this dialogue box. And by that time, the product manager came with completely different requirements. And unfortunately, that piece of code will no longer be in use at all because, this new dialog box is going to have different content or different things in it. So much so that the person who created this component, if you will, wanted to try and share it to folks, try to find someone who can use this component. And, kind of the work that one would do in Agile, a lot of things are going to change. So it's not always a good idea to start with the most verbose, complicated feature because, a couple of days later, your product manager might come down the line and say, hey, we might need to change that. We won't even need a dialog box. We'll send them to the next page or whatever. So it's always good to ensure that by putting the simplest code out would be best for your team to move forward. Now, I know that does not mean that it's the easiest. Sometimes the simplest can be the hardest. You can just make sure you are writing clean code as you're doing the simplest thing, knowing hey, if I needed to extend this, I know that we would have to follow this procedure, if you will. But doing that up front can cost you a lot, especially when the project that you're working on could change midway during the sprint, for example. So always be careful of, scratching that itch to want to use the latest tech or a completely different paradigm that doesn't allow you to get the work done as fast as possible. According to the book, it says the following. XP is making a bet. It is betting that it is better to do a simple thing today and pay a little more tomorrow to change it if it needs it, than to do a more complicated thing today that may never be used anyway. And I think that captures the idea of simplicity perfectly, especially with the story that is provided by the book as well. Making those small changes, starting with something simple, if you need to scrap it, it doesn't feel as bad because you only spent 20 minutes on it. If you spend a lot of time and then it gets thrown out, that's a completely separate issue. And, people may feel like all that work was done for nothing. But you always make sure that you can do the most simplest thing. And that might include this could also be a catch-22, especially when it comes to pull request, because you may be reviewing someone's pull request and may have an idea on, ways to extend it and make it more extensible, if you will. But that might conflict with the idea of trying to make it as simple as possible. And, to have to be able to defend it and mention like, hey, no, this is hard coded right now because this is all we need right now. We're going to come back into this and change it. Definitely, as a PR reviewer, if that's something y'all do, ensure that you are having that lens of like, hey, I imagine this is going to get looked at again, or we're going to extend this bit. So for right now, these features are fine, and we'll figure out how to, better fix these other things down the line. So when you're out there producing some code, take a deep breath in and ask yourself, what is the simplest thing I can do? We want to get that ticket from the currently in progress swim lane and over to the done swim lane and figure out how fast we can do that without jeopardizing the quality of the code. Of course, always keep that in mind. But that doesn't always mean to make things complicated. So go out there and keep it simple.
Follow us now on Twitter at Radio Free Rabbit so we can keep the conversation going. Like what you hear? Give us a 5-star review and help developers just like you find their way into the rabbit hole. And never miss an episode. Subscribe now however you listen to your favorite podcast. On behalf of our producer extraordinaire, William Jeffries, and my amazing co-host, Dave Anderson, and me, your host, Michael Nunez, thanks for listening to The Rabbit Hole.